The diner off I-70 in eastern Colorado smelled like burnt coffee and hot diesel, a strange cologne that clung to the vinyl booze and the sleeves of anyone who paused long enough to breathe. Mason Hale didn't belong there. He belonged in glass boardrooms and silent elevators, not under a fluorescent hum where pie turned under a domed plastic lid. But after a 15-hour drive from Aspen that he'd insisted on making himself, driver dismissed, security waved off, he slid into a booth like a man trying to fold a skyscraper into a shoebox. He told himself he was chasing solitude. What he found, when a long hauler rolled into the gravel lot and let its engine cough to a stop, was something else entirely. The truck, a sun-faded Peterbilt with a grin of chrome, carried a small miracle on its dashboard, a teddy bear, tan once but gone wheat-colored with years, slumped against the windshield glass. Its left ear had a crude, careful stitch in green thread. A child's insistence lived in that stitch, a promise that the ear would never fall off again. Mason didn't need to blink twice. He knew the bear the way a drowning man knows the cut of a wave. Mr. Buttons. His daughter Sophie had named him before she learned to write the letter S. The ear had torn at the Boulder County Fair 12 summers ago, and Mason had fixed it himself with a hotel sewing kit under a lamp that buzzed like a trapped fly. Sophie had watched him with moon-wide eyes and declared the fix perfect forever. She'd fallen asleep hugging the bear in the rental car. By morning, Sophie was gone. The booth's vinyl groaned as Mason stood without realizing it. The truck driver climbed down from the cab, boots meeting gravel with a patient crunch. Jacket open, ball cap shoved back. He had the easy balance of someone used to high seats and long horizons. He nodded at the waitress. "Evenin', Dana." And his voice carried the low music of Arkansas or Missouri, somewhere river soft. Mason's mouth went dry. He walked out into the twilight before his better judgment could tackle him. "Hey," he called, and heard how raw the word sounded. "Excuse me." The driver turned. Up close, he was younger than the mile suggested, early 30s maybe, with a day-old beard and eyes the color of truck stop coffee. "You lost, friend." Mason pointed, not trusting his voice. Through the windshield the bear stared out, muzzle rubbed shiny. The driver followed the line of his finger, then squinted like he had to bring the moment into focus. "Oh, that." He shrugged. "Good luck charm. Where did you get it?" Mason asked. The gravel felt unsteady under his loafers. "I need to know." The driver's gaze flicked to Mason's watch. Thin, expensive, the kind of thing that keeps perfect time during imperfect years. Caution crept into the man's posture. He hooked his thumbs in his belt loops and took half a step back. "You a cop or something?" "My name is Mason Hale." He hated how that sounded, the reflex of a man accustomed to doors opening. Here, it didn't open anything. That bear belonged to my daughter. A wind pushed across the lot. Flags over the diesel pumps snapped once like someone clapped, and then everything went quiet. The driver looked over his shoulder at the bear, then back at Mason. Something softened in his face, maybe pity, maybe trouble. "Name's Dakota Reed," he said finally. "Everybody calls me Coda. And I didn't steal your bear, Mr. Hale. Girl at a rest stop gave it to me." When the word scraped out, Coda tilted his head, thinking. Nebraska side of the border. Interstate 80. 2 summers back. Late June. Kid was alone by the vending machines. "Little thing." She said the bear's name was. He glanced at the dash as if the bear might remind him. "Not Buttons." She called him Captain Clover. Green thread, Mason thought, feeling the ground tilt. Clover. A child's leap from color to luck. "I tried to find who she was with," Coda went on. "But by the time I got my coffee and came back out, she was gone. Left the bear on my step like it was meant for me." Mason heard his pulse in his ears, a dull siren. 12 years of looking had taught him to fear false hope more than grief. But hope had always been a reckless driver. It crawled up his spine now, hands over eyes, whispering, "Look, tell me everything," he said. "Every detail. Start with the rest stop." Coda looked past Mason to the diner, where Dana was flipping the closed sign even though the sky still held a last wash of pink. He studied Mason like a way station scale, deciding what to make of the load. "I'll tell you," he said, "but not out here." He gestured toward the cab, toward the bear with the green thread ear, and Mason realized that for the first time in years he was about to climb into a stranger's truck to chase a ghost that might not be a ghost at all. The climb into Coda's cab felt like stepping into a different kind of silence, one padded with old leather, CB static, and the faint smell of cinnamon gum. The bear sat slouched on the dash, staring out at the parking lot as if it had been waiting for Mason all these years. The green-threaded ear caught the glow of the diner's neon open/closed sign, blinking like a lazy heartbeat. Coda swung into the driver's seat and reached for a thermos tucked into the cup holder. "Coffee?" he asked. Mason shook his head. He wasn't sure he could swallow anything without it catching in his throat. "Start from the beginning." The trucker leaned back, eyes on the horizon instead of Mason. "June, 2 years ago. I was headed west from Omaha with a load of farm equipment. Heat was pushing 100, so I pulled into this rest stop near Big Springs, Nebraska. You know the kind, concrete picnic tables, 2 vending machines, a couple of sad trees trying to make shade." Mason pictured it, flat land stretching so far you could hear the earth breathe. "I saw her right away," Coda said. Kid couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. Sitting on the curb by the Coke machine, swinging her legs like she was waiting on someone. Had a backpack, pink, with a rainbow stitched on. And the bear. She was holding it close, like it was keeping her steady. Mason's stomach tightened. Sophie had been 6 when she vanished. 12 years later, the math didn't match, but faces change, names change. Bears stay the same. "I asked if she was lost," Coda went on. She smiled, real shy, and said she was fine, just waiting for her mom to come back. Asked me where I was headed. I said Colorado. She said, "That's where Captain Clover belongs." He glanced at Mason. "Guess she renamed your Mr. Buttons somewhere along the way." Mason almost smiled at the stubborn innocence of that. "Anyway, I went inside to get coffee. Whole stop took maybe 10 minutes. When I came back, she was gone. No car pulling out, no one in the bathrooms, no sign she'd even been there, except the bear, sitting right on my bottom step, facing forward like a passenger." Mason frowned. "You didn't look for her?" Coda's jaw tightened. "I did. Drove the lot twice. Checked the nearby gas station. Even asked a highway patrolman parked on the ramp. He said he hadn't seen any kid. Figured maybe she slipped into an RV or a car I didn't notice." The thought made Mason's skin crawl. "And you never reported it?" "I'm a trucker, Mr. Hale. Cops don't exactly line up to believe our stories." And Coda hesitated. She didn't seem scared. Just gone. Like smoke. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the lot emptied, and the hum of a distant interstate rolled over them. "Do you remember anything else?" Mason asked. "Anything at all? A car, a voice, what she looked like?" Coda rubbed his chin. Blonde hair, shoulder length. Wore one of those sundresses with flowers on it, yellow and white. She had a bandage on her knee. Said she'd tripped running through the tall grass. That's what she called it. Mason's mind was already spinning. Tall grass could mean 1,000 places, but a child alone, with a story like that, 2 summers ago? Somewhere there had to be a trace. Coda broke the silence. "Why's the bear so important?" Mason took a long breath. "Because if that girl was Sophie, my Sophie, then she's not gone. Not the way I thought." Coda studied him for a long moment. "And if she's not, then I'll have to lose her all over again." The CB crackled softly, a ghost of a voice asking for a southbound report. Coda reached up and flicked the switch off. "You said you wanted every detail," Coda said finally. "There's one more. Before I went in for coffee, the girl asked me something strange. She said, 'If you see the man with the silver watch, tell him I found the river.'" Mason's pulse kicked hard. Sophie had been obsessed with rivers, reading maps, tracing blue lines with her finger. The watch, though, he looked down at the thin gold rim on his wrist, gleaming like an accusation. "That's not silver," Coda added, nodding to it. But maybe she didn't remember. Or maybe someone told her wrong, Mason thought. And for the first time in 12 years, the search felt alive again. The phrase kept looping in Mason's head like a stubborn song lyric. "I found the river." It wasn't just random. Sophie had used rivers as escape routes in her make-believe games, always drawing them on scraps of paper, calling them the way home. Coda started the engine, the Peterbilt's rumble making the dash shake. "Mr. Buttons." "No." Captain Clover leaned forward slightly, as if straining to hear. "Where are we going?" Mason asked. "Big Springs," Coda said, eyes on the mirrors. "If you want to start chasing ghosts, that's where the trail goes cold." Mason hesitated. "You drive back for this?" Coda shifted into gear. You're not the only one who's thought about that, kid. The highway pulled them west, the night settling heavy and moonless. Trucks became shadows with red eyes. Mason kept glancing at the bear, the frayed stitching. He'd sewn it himself one night in a motel outside Pueblo while Sophie slept beside him. The green thread had come from a sewing kit he'd borrowed from the front desk. He'd been so careful to make each stitch even. You still haven't told me why she matters this much, Coda said after a long stretch of road. Mason stared at the dark ribbon ahead. 12 years ago, I left my daughter at a hotel room while I went downstairs to take a business call. 10 minutes. When I came back, she was gone. No forced entry. No witnesses. The police had theories. Too many. None right. I searched every lead until they all went cold. I buried her in my mind because I couldn't bury her anywhere else. Coda whistled low. That's a hell to live in. It's not hell, Mason said. Hell is finding out she might have been out there all along. The truck hummed over the asphalt, and Mason's mind returned to the message. I found the river. There was only one major river near Big Springs, the South Platte. But Sophie had never been to Nebraska, at least not with him. Around midnight, they pulled into a truck stop 20 miles shy of the state line. Coda killed the engine. We'll catch a couple hours sleep here. Better to hit that rest stop in daylight. Mason nodded, though sleep felt impossible. His gaze drifted to the bear again. Mind if I hold it, he asked. Coda studied him, then reached for the dash and placed the bear gently in Mason's hands. The fabric was softer than he remembered, worn to almost silk. The green thread prickled under his thumb. On instinct, Mason pressed the seam where the ear met the head and felt something inside. A lump. He froze. There's something in here. Coda leaned closer. Like what? Mason pinched the seam until he found a tiny slit, almost invisible. His heart pounded as he teased something out. A folded strip of paper, yellowed and thin from years of hiding. He unfolded it carefully. In cramped, uneven handwriting, Sophie's handwriting, were 3 words. Follow the ferry. Mason stared at the message, his hands trembling. Sophie hadn't just survived. She'd been leaving him a trail. And now, for the first time in over a decade, he had her voice in his hands. The paper trembled in Mason's grip as if it carried its own pulse. Follow the ferry. Coda tilted his head. That mean anything to you? Mason shook his head slowly. Not yet. Sophie used to leave little scavenger hunts for me. Notes under pillows in my briefcase. Things like find the magic tree or look where the stars hide. This feels like one of those. But, ferry? She'd never even been on one. Maybe it's not a boat, Coda said. Could be a place, a person's name, even a company. Lots of things carry that word. Mason folded the paper back along the worn creases and slipped it into his pocket like it was made of glass. If she wrote this 2 years ago, she wanted someone to find it, which means she knew someone was looking. They didn't talk much after that. The night had its own voice, low engines, passing rigs sighing in the opposite lane, the occasional distant whistle of a train cutting through farmland. Mason didn't sleep. Instead, he sat in the passenger seat, watching headlights arc across the dash, touching the bear now and then like it might vanish if left alone. His mind spun over the possibilities. Ferry crossings in Nebraska, old river transport points along the South Platte, even tourist attractions that used the name. At dawn, Coda started the engine and aimed for Big Springs. The horizon bloomed gold and peach, the sun climbing up from the flat earth like a slow miracle. They reached the rest stop by mid-morning. It was exactly as Coda had described. 2 vending machines humming beside a squat brick building, picnic tables baking in the sun, and a few wind-warped trees trying to throw shade across cracked concrete. Mason stepped out, the air thick with the smell of cut grass and warm asphalt. He scanned the place like it might still hold Sophie's shadow. Right there, Coda said, pointing to the curb by the Coke machine. That's where she sat. Pink backpack, bear in her arms, smiling like she had a secret. Mason walked over, crouching low. The paint on the curb was chipped, the ground littered with cigarette filters and bottle caps. No magic here, at least not the kind that left visible marks. Then he saw it, scratched faintly into the concrete, so light it might have been missed in the wrong light, were 3 letters. F, F, R. Follow the ferry, Mason murmured. Coda knelt beside him. Could be coincidence. Not to her, Mason said. She marked this. She wanted someone to know she'd been here. A breeze rustled through the dying trees. Somewhere behind the building, a truck door slammed. Coda straightened. If she left that here, maybe she left something else too. They searched the area for nearly an hour, checking under tables, behind vending machines, along the edge where mowed grass met tall weeds. Nothing. Just sunburn and the slow realization that the trail might end here after all. Mason stood at the edge of the lot, staring toward the distant shimmer of the South Platte. The river wasn't much more than a silver ribbon from this far, but it curved toward the horizon like it knew something he didn't. Then Coda's voice called from behind the vending machines. Mason, you need to see this." Mason rounded the corner and froze. Carved into the back wall, low to the ground where only someone small would think to look, was another message, shallow but clear. Next stop, home. And under it, a crude drawing of a boat with a flag. The kind of boat you'd see at a river crossing. The kind of boat that might just be a ferry. The crude drawing of the ferry seemed to lean toward the river, like it was pointing. Mason traced it with his fingertips, the grooves rough and fresh compared to the weathered brick. Coda crouched beside him, squinting. "If this is 2 years old, weather's been kind to it." "Or she came back," Mason said quietly. Coda's brow lifted. "That means she's still close?" "It means," Mason said, glancing toward the thin silver line of the South Platte. "She's moving in a pattern. She's leaving messages. She wants to be found." Back in the truck, Mason pulled out his phone and searched for ferry crossings anywhere near the river. Nebraska didn't have many. Bridges had replaced most of them long ago, but one stood out. A tiny tourist ferry in a nearly forgotten town called Riverbend, 40 miles downstream. Riverbend, Mason said aloud, almost tasting the word. "It runs one small boat back and forth for sightseers. Summer months only." Coda nodded slowly. 2 years ago, late June, that ferry would have been running. They drove with the urgency of a hunt. The landscape flattened, the river sometimes vanishing behind rows of corn before flashing back into view like a shy snake. Mason felt his chest tighten as they approached the sign for welcome to Riverbend. EST 1889. It wasn't much of a town. A single main street ran parallel to the river, lined with faded storefronts, a diner, a bait shop, a thrift store with a window full of mismatched mugs. Beyond that, the river glinted wide and lazy, and tied to a weathered dock was the ferry, more a flat-bottomed barge than a boat, painted white with peeling blue trim. They parked and walked toward the dock. An older man in overalls was coiling rope, his skin darkened by years under the sun. He looked up as they approached. "Morning," he said. "Ferry runs on the half hour. $2 a head, cars extra." "We're not here to cross," Mason said. "I'm looking for someone." A girl, maybe 8 years old 2 summers ago. Blonde hair, yellow sundress. She might have been here alone. The man's eyes narrowed. 2 summers back? June? Yes. He tapped the side of his head, thinking. Had a kid like that. Quiet. Sat on the edge of the dock, swinging her legs. Kept looking upriver, like she was waiting for something. Asked me if the ferry could take her home. Mason's breath caught. Did she say we're homeless? Nope. Just home. I told her the ferry only goes across. She said that was fine. She'd find the rest of the way. What happened to her? Mason's voice sharpened. The man shrugged. Some folks came by, man and woman. Said she was their niece. Girl didn't argue. Left with M. Didn't seem scared, though. Seemed like she expected M. Coda and Mason exchanged a glance. Can you describe them? Coda asked. The ferryman scratched his chin. Man had a limp. Woman wore a red scarf, even in that heat. That's all I remember. Mason's mind spun. Limp. Red scarf. He didn't know the faces, but they felt like puzzle pieces sliding into place. Then the ferryman added, almost as an afterthought. Before she left, she stuck something under that bench over there. Didn't see what. Could still be there, if the river rats didn't get it. Mason was moving before the man finished. The bench sat crooked on the dock, one leg shorter than the rest. Mason dropped to his knees and reached beneath it. His fingers brushed something dry and papery. He pulled it out. A drawing. Crayon on folded paper. Blue river, green trees, a boat with a flag. And in the corner, a tiny stick figure girl holding hands with a taller stick figure man. Above them, in Sophie's familiar, crooked letters. Almost there. And on the back, one word. Haven. Mason felt the name lodge deep in his chest like a key fitting into a lock. The word sat heavy in Mason's palm. Haven. It wasn't just a name, it was a promise. Sophie's handwriting curved on the page with the same childish confidence she'd had when labeling treasure maps in crayon. Coda leaned over his shoulder. Haven. Could be a town, could be a place someone made up. You recognize it? Mason shook his head slowly. Not from before. But Sophie used to invent safe spots in her games. Places where no one could find us but her. She'd name them things like Star Fort or Haven Hill. Coda rubbed his jaw. So it's either a real place, or she's giving you a code only you'd understand. Mason folded the drawing carefully and slid it into his inside jacket pocket. Either way, it's the next step. They left the dock, the ferryman watching them with mild curiosity. On Main Street, the thrift store's door creaked when Mason pushed it open. The smell of dust and old paper filled the air. An elderly woman behind the counter glanced up from a crossword. Morning. Looking for anything in particular? Information, Mason said. You ever hear of a place called Haven? The woman's eyes lit faintly, like she'd just stepped into a memory. Well, there's an old summer camp by that name. Haven Creek Camp. Been closed for years. Flood took out half the cabins back in '09. Kids still sneak out there sometimes. You can find it upriver, 20 miles north. Coda raised a brow at Mason. Upriver, just like your ferryman's girl was looking. The woman leaned forward on her elbows. Why do you ask? That place, it's not exactly friendly these days. Locals say it's squatters, but some say it's worse. Mason didn't answer. His chest felt tight, his pulse a slow drumbeat in his ears. They left town within minutes, the Peterbilt growling over cracked county roads that wound alongside the river. Trees grew thicker here, leaning in over the road like they were listening. By late afternoon, they reached the turnoff, a narrow dirt track disappearing into pines. A faded sign, its paint peeling away, read, Haven Creek Camp, a place for every child. The words were a cruel echo. Coda parked just inside the treeline. The camp lay silent ahead, cabins gray with rot, windows boarded. The river curved behind it, wide and slow, glittering under the sinking sun. Mason stepped out, the air cooler here, tinged with damp earth. Every creak of wood and whisper of wind felt amplified. They moved slowly through the camp, past the dining hall, past a rusted swing set where chains groaned in the breeze. Mason's eyes scanned everything, walls, door frames, stones, for Sophie's hand. And then he saw it. On the side of a small cabin, carved into the wood, was a symbol he knew as well as his own name. A crooked heart with an arrow through it. Sophie's secret mark. Underneath, in faint but legible letters. Last light. Mason touched the carving, feeling the grooves. She'd been here. She'd left this for him. Coda glanced toward the sinking sun. Last light. Could be a time. Could be a place. Could be now. A rustle came from the trees beyond the cabin. Both men froze. And then, through the shadows, a small figure stepped into view, blonde hair catching the sunset. The girl stopped just beyond the treeline, half hidden by the dying light. The sun flared behind her, turning her hair into a halo. Mason's breath caught. It was like looking through time itself. She was older than Sophie had been the day she vanished, but the shape of her face, the tilt of her chin, it was the same. She stood barefoot on the mossy ground, holding something close to her chest. Coda's voice dropped to a whisper. That her? Mason couldn't speak. His throat had closed around 12 years of grief. The girl tilted her head, studying them, then glanced toward the cabin wall, toward the heart, an arrow she must have carved herself. Her eyes flicked back to Mason, sharp with calculation. You're late, she said. Mason stepped forward, heart pounding. Sophie. She hugged the object tighter. It was a small tin lunchbox, dented and scuffed. I don't go by that name anymore. What do you go by? Her lips pressed together. Doesn't matter. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe after last light. Coda glanced at the woods. Safe from what? She looked at him, weighing something in her mind. From them. The word hung in the air like a chill. Before Mason could ask, a low rumble rolled through the trees. It wasn't thunder, it was closer, heavier, like boots on wet ground. Sophie's, the girl's, eyes darted toward the sound. She stepped forward just enough to press the lunchbox into Mason's hands. This is for you. Don't open it here. Keep moving toward the river. Mason swallowed hard. I came to take you home. Her gaze softened, just for a heartbeat. You can't, not yet. If you stay, you'll never leave. Coda's jaw tightened. Kid, you're coming with us. No. Her voice cracked like glass. She glanced over her shoulder. The rumble was closer now, joined by the sound of snapping branches. She backed away, retreating toward the trees. Follow the river until the lights stop. Then open it. And before Mason could move, she turned and vanished into the shadowed forest, swallowed whole. The noises in the woods grew louder, closer, and Mason felt his skin crawl. Coda grabbed his arm. We need to move, now. They ran, the lunchbox clutched in Mason's grip like the only solid thing left in the world. Behind them, shapes flickered in the treeline, too fast to be human, too big to be animals. When they reached the truck, Coda fired the engine and swung it back toward the road. Neither of them spoke until the camp was a mile behind. Finally, Mason looked down at the lunchbox resting on his knees. The paint was chipped, the latch rusted, but across the lid, in fading red letters, was a single word. Haven. The Peterbilt roared along the empty road, its headlights carving twin tunnels through the dusk. Mason kept the lunchbox balanced on his knees, afraid to set it down. Every bump in the road made the rusted latch rattle like a loose tooth. Coda kept glancing at him. You gonna open it? She told me not to. Not until the lights stop. Coda frowned. And what lights would that be? Mason stared out at the darkening horizon. I don't know, but Sophie's clues have never been random. If she says wait, we wait. The road curved away from the river for several miles before dipping back toward it. Through breaks in the trees, Mason could see flashes of water, silver under the rising moon. They passed a scattering of houses, most dark, a few glowing with the bluish light of televisions. Mason's chest tightened. Almost there. That's what Sophie had written in her drawing. But almost where? For nearly an hour, they drove in silence. The lights Sophie spoke of didn't appear, until, just beyond a bend, the sky ahead began to pulse with an eerie, unnatural glow. At first Mason thought it was lightning, but as they drew closer, he saw the source. A massive riverside grain elevator, floodlit on all sides, the glow spilling across the water like molten gold. The thing towered over the surrounding fields, its hum audible even from the road. That's it, Mason said quietly. The lights. Coda slowed as they approached. The elevator's floodlights burned so bright that shadows looked sharper than daylight. They passed it, the glow fading behind them, replaced by the soft darkness of unlit riverbanks. Only the moonlight remained now, painting the water pale and cold. The lights have stopped, Coda said. Mason nodded once and unlatched the box. The hinge squealed in protest, then gave way. Inside, neatly stacked and bound with twine, were photographs. Dozens of them. Mason's hands shook as he lifted the first bundle. The top photo made his breath hitch. It was Sophie, maybe a year older than when she vanished, standing barefoot in a field, her hair tangled by the wind. She was smiling, but her eyes looked like she was carrying a secret too heavy for a child. He flipped through the stack. Sophie on a riverbank, Sophie in front of a weathered shack, Sophie on the deck of the Riverbend ferry. In each photo, someone's shadow loomed in the frame, a tall man's silhouette, a thin woman's outline, always just out of focus. The second bundle was different, maps. Hand-drawn, marked with rivers, backroads, and circles. One circle in red ink was labeled simply, The Crossing. The last item in the box was a note, folded once. Mason's stomach knotted as he opened it. The handwriting was still hers, uneven and childlike. I'm safe, but I can't stay here. The crossing is where you'll find me, when it's time. Don't trust the red scarf. Mason read it twice, then a third time. Coda's eyes flicked to the road ahead. The woman at the ferry, the red scarf. Mason nodded, gripping the note. Whoever she is, she's part of this. And Sophie's still running from her. A shiver went through the cab, though neither man had moved. Then, from somewhere behind them, far back on the empty road, came the low growl of an engine. Not a car, not a truck, something slower, and getting closer. Coda checked the mirrors, his knuckles whitening on the wheel. You hear that? Mason turned in his seat. Far behind them, in the dim wash of moonlight, a pair of pale beams glowed low to the ground. Not headlights, lanterns. They swayed with an almost lazy rhythm, The engines hummed deep and patient. "They're following," Mason said. Coda pressed harder on the accelerator, the Peterbilt's diesel growl answering the threat. But the lights in the distance didn't shrink. If anything, they were creeping closer, like something that didn't care about speed, just inevitability. Mason clutched the lunchbox, the smell of old metal filling his lungs. "We need to get to the crossing. Whatever it is, that's where she wants us." Coda kept his eyes on the road. "Only problem, we don't know where the hell it is." Mason dug through the maps from the box, his fingers flipping past faded pencil marks and water stains until one page stopped him cold. It was the river's shape, drawn in Sophie's careful, looping hand, but with a sharp X at a bend where a smaller creek split off. The label was simple, "Crossing." He spread the map on the dash. "Here, it's about 15 miles ahead. We'll have to take the old levee road." Coda grunted and swung the wheel onto a dirt turnoff barely wide enough for the truck. The river hugged them close on the right, its dark surface catching slivers of moonlight. The sound behind them shifted, engine and lantern still there, but now joined by something else. Faint at first, then clearer, a slow, deliberate scrape, like metal against stone. Mason didn't dare look back. They reached a wooden bridge, its slats groaning under the Peterbilt's weight. Beyond it, the road narrowed further, the trees closing in until their branches clawed at the mirrors. "There," Mason said, pointing to a break in the trees. The river widened here into a calm pool, the creek feeding in from the left. A half-rotted ferry dock jutted into the water, its boards slick with moss. The place felt abandoned, except for the faint smell of smoke and the sound of water lapping against something just out of sight. Coda killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Mason climbed down, the lunchbox still in his grip, and stepped toward the dock. The air was cooler here, carrying the scent of wet wood and old rope. Something moved in the shadows, a figure stepping out from behind a leaning piling. The scarf caught the moonlight first. Red, bright even in the dark. The woman's face was thin, almost elegant, but her eyes were cold, flat. She studied Mason like she was measuring a purchase. "You've come a long way," she said, her voice low and unhurried. "But you've taken something that belongs to me." Coda stepped between them. "The girl isn't yours." The woman's lips twitched into the smallest hint of a smile. "She's not yours either. Not anymore." Behind her, the lantern glow thickened, several figures now, stepping off a low, wide boat that had drifted silently to the dock. Men with heavy coats despite the heat, their boots thudding in unison on the wet boards. The woman tilted her head toward Mason. "You've reached the crossing, Mr. Hale. Now you have to decide which side you stand on." And somewhere across the river, faint but unmistakable, came a girl's voice. "Dad, run." Mason's body reacted before his mind caught up. He bolted toward the voice. But the red-scarfed woman moved like water, stepping into his path, her hand brushing the air between them as if to remind him she could close the distance whenever she wished. "Go ahead," she said softly. "But the river has rules." Coda's boots scraped on the dock as he shifted, placing himself closer to Mason. The men from the boat fanned out, their shadows stretching long over the boards. Mason's grip on the lunchbox tightened until the rusted edges dug into his palm. From the far bank, Sophie's voice came again, closer now, but urgent, breathless. "Follow the ferry." The words slammed into him like the first night she'd vanished. He spun toward the dock's edge, toward the low, wide boat the men had arrived in. It was the only way across, and she knew it. Coda caught his arm. "You sure about this?" "No," Mason said. "But we're out of time." The woman's eyes glinted under the moon. "If you cross, you can't come back the same." "Neither can she." Mason shot back. Before the men could close in, Mason shoved past her, vaulted onto the boat's slippery deck, and grabbed the nearest pole. Coda was right behind him, untying the rope with hands that worked faster than thought. The river took them immediately, the current pushing hard toward midstream. Behind them, the woman's voice rose, not shouting, but steady, promising. "She's not yours to save, Hale. She's been mine for 12 years. Mason ignored her, scanning the far bank. And then, there, Sophie stood in the shadows of the trees, barefoot, her hair wild in the night breeze. She stepped forward as the ferry's bow scraped the muddy shore. When his feet hit land, Mason dropped the lunchbox at her side. "It's yours." She didn't open it. She just looked up at him, eyes glistening. You followed the river. I'll follow you anywhere, he said. Her smile was small, but it carried 12 years of weight. Then she glanced past him, toward the other bank. We have to go before she sends the others. They plunged into the trees together, Coda close behind, the moonlight slicing through the branches. The river's roar faded behind them, replaced by the thud of their own footsteps and the ragged sound of breathing. Only when they climbed a ridge and looked back did Mason see the truth. The dock on the far bank was empty. No lanterns, no boat, no red scarf, just the slow, silver river, carrying whatever it had taken back into the dark. Mason wrapped his arm around Sophie, feeling her pulse against his side. For the first time in 12 years, he wasn't chasing her through memory or shadow. She was here, alive. But deep in his chest, he knew the river hadn't finished with them. And somewhere, down its winding length, a red scarf waited.